Evolution in Divine Love is an invitation to reimagine everything from the place where it all begins and where it all returns. Love.
Welcome to today's episode of Evolution in Divine Love podcast, as we continue to explore Chapter 4, The Depths of Matter. In the previous sections of this chapter, Swami Padmanabha takes us on an adventure of matter, its profound depths, its aliveness, and perpetual expansion. And in the two sections that we'll be discussing today, which is the possibility of biological evolution and is biological evolution mentioned in sacred texts, we'll be first speaking with Swami Padmanabha, the author of Evolution in Divine Love, and later with Vraja Kishor Das, who offers further perspectives on the overarching question of does deep evolution of matter, which Swami describes as the ultimate backdrop of biological unfolding and material creation being that of divine love, does that resonate with the concept of biological or Darwinian evolution? So thank you for inviting us to this conversation, Maharaj. To begin with, I was wondering if you could share how the broad vision of deep evolution shapes the way we even approach the idea of biological evolution.
Yeah, thank you. So, of course, when we say biological evolution, that's also a broad term, and there are different strands and ways of approaching that. So it's not just one thing, biological evolution, or even Darwinian evolution, natural selection. And there are different stances in the Gaudiya Vaishnava community about this as well. So that's why we are talking about the possibility, like an exploration of something that could be possible or not, and which are the pros and cons or the different thoughts about it. But to begin with, the premise is that has been made before reaching chapter 4, which is the depths of matter and therefore the evolution of matter, the eternal becoming, as the subtitle of the work says, of matter also. We begin with the notion that divine love or love, God, us, units of consciousness are by nature in an ever-evolving journey. So that must therefore also be, even starting with as a possibility, as an intuition. Okay, if the source of everything, if we are theistic people subscribing to these ideals, if the source of reality, so to say, is ever-evolving, is dynamic, is there the possibility that, I don't want to say the byproducts of that source, but everything that exists in connection to that source may share, on some level at least, a similar DNA, which in our philosophy, Jiva Goswami even talks about that in his Sandarbhas with the concept of Satkaryabad, and I refer to that in my book as well, which basically entails that idea that the effect of a cause somehow possesses some of the qualities of that thing that caused the effect to begin with. So I try to make that case in the first chapters, right? Speaking about love, then about God, then about the soul, how according to the Gaudiya Vaishnava perspective and according to the broader view of other mystical spiritual traditions, there is a case to make about a dynamic reality, a process, way of seeing things, and it's an ongoing unfolding. So how, with that put on one side of the scale, we can approach the notion of evolution in matter, whether you want to call it biological evolution, Darwinian evolution, or any other form, and how we can explore matter, as I try to argue in the book, how to conceive matter evolving in tandem to accommodate the evolution of consciousness or the evolution of love. Because ultimately for us, if we speak about the evolution of consciousness unto itself, as Srila Bhakti Dev Goswami will say, Satchit Ananda. So Sat means eternal existence and Chit means consciousness. But the fulfillment of consciousness is Anandam, or ecstasy, beauty, love. So if there is something called the evolution of consciousness, and ultimately that speaks about the evolution of love, if love is ever evolving, then we conclude, based on that, that matter, as one of these many departments of existence that exist as an extension of, or even as a byproduct of love, and our tradition says that Lokabhatu Lila Kaivalyam, the Srishti Lila, or the divine or the sacred play of creation, is basically the outcome of the outpouring of God's heart exploding, if I may be allowed to become that poetic. So if this world of matter, this cosmos, this creation is a consequence of the evolution of divine love, then naturally that consequence also exists in connection to that, in service to that, and therefore its own pace of unfolding and evolution is there to somehow follow the pace of the evolution of love and trying to accommodate, if you will, to accompany properly the expansion of consciousness of love.
Yeah, thank you for that. And hearing you speak, and as I was reading your this section, that common saying that necessity is the mother of invention really came to mind again. We've mentioned it in the past, but thinking of how the as one's capacity to love increases, then that creates certain necessities, and the biology would need to follow those necessities of love, because for us to embody and to experience and to grow those in relationship of love, then the biology would need to facilitate that. So that really came to life again, that saying necessity is the mother of invention, kind of like the mother of evolution, and how our own necessity for love, just like God's necessity for love, creates the necessity for matter, like you said, to accompany the expansion.
Yeah, and again, one word for necessity in Sanskrit is prayojan, which means translates as necessity, but also it's always attached to the word prem, or love. So necessity is a matter of invention. It's another way of saying love is a matter of creativity. So to say, it's all these words tied together. And of course, and as I mentioned in my book, I understand that many times, especially in religious circles, theistic groups, counting among our tradition as well, some may struggle with the notion of an evolution in matter or biological evolution, especially when such evolution is many times framed as random, or I don't know, purposeless or mechanistic, while actually ungodless by conclusion. But again, as I try to make the point in my book, what appears random to us may not be so for God, right? So, so despite generally this type of notions of biological evolution, even if we are exploring this as a possibility, not trying to assert any conclusive stance in regards to it, but even while it is historically associated with ideas of atheism or non-theism, or again, purely something purely mechanistic and random, there's a place to see, no, this unfolding looks random to our particular eyes. We analyze things in a certain way, which generally we are not accustomed to understand reality as unfolding to accommodate the necessities of love. So generally we don't tend to try to frame or understand things in that framework. So probably that's how reality is unfolding according to the seers of mystical traditions. But if we are not that seer, we don't have that cosmovision, that framework, yeah, it may seem random, it may seem purposeless, but just because we are still have not fully contacted the ultimate purpose of life, which is love and its unfolding. So But yeah, necessity is a matter of invention, for sure.
This is such a complex topic. As you were speaking, I'm like thinking, yeah, I mean, one of the things that I heard like coming into this practice is the idea of evolution is like false and, so much like dislike toward it. And even calling like, I mean, anyway, I don't want to get into it now, but it's still confusing to me because, according to Darwin, it's like the humans evolved like a few thousands of years ago or whatever. But then in our scriptures, we have this idea of like, humans existing in Satya Yuga, which is like millions and millions of years ago, which seems to be contradicting, So one can say, okay, yeah, look, the scriptures is saying this, so the idea of evolution is wrong or something like that. And you also mention here that the scriptural texts are not meant to answer scientific questions, but we still go to them and think like, whatever they say somehow is the truth compared to the scientific discovery. So yeah, I mean, all these questions, so if one were to ask you that, like, how do you say like humans existed in Satya Yuga and all of that, but according to Darwinian evolution, humans only evolved a few thousands of years ago. I don't know the number exactly. So yeah, what would you say to that?
Yeah, again, to be honest, again, from my personal perspective, I'm not here asserting one stance of the other. I'm in my own exploration process. That's why I named that section of the book The Possibility of Biological Evolution. So I'm not here making a case for that being an absolute fact, but I think there is place to be open to some of these currents of information and evidence that many times can be quite evident or undeniable, at least to some degree. And again, in the not only in the Gaudiya Vaishnava community, but in other spiritual communities, you can always see the different opinions in that, and sometimes, of course, heated debates and triggers about those who think differently and ways of seeing scripture in a more absolutistic way, relativistic way, of putting that in different contexts. One thing that I will say to begin with, and I try to clarify that in my book, even if we stop to entertain the possibility of it, many times there is this overreaction in religious communities against biological evolution, Darwinian evolution, as if that implies that consciousness is a byproduct of matter. While that's not part of the original theory. Maybe in time, for some people, that's what it meant for them, but it's not that Darwin himself, and I try to mention in my book, he himself was connected with Christianity and had influences in his life of people who were connected to spiritual currents. And he himself struggled then to make sense of his own theory in light of his personal beliefs, so to say. So many times I would say some of the teachers in our tradition or in other traditions took a strong stance toward that, mostly in the direction of, Srila Prabhupada would say, life comes from life. Life does not come from matter. Consciousness is not a byproduct or an epiphenomenon, as they will say in more technical language, of the brain, but the other way around, which is non-negotiable in my words in the book. This is non-negotiable for me. Whether we open to entertain some possibilities, which is non-negotiable, at least from our Gaudiya perspective, is that consciousness in connection to matter for us is not that consciousness is a byproduct of matter, but the other way around, no? Like an evolution itself, if we agree on evolution runs on the primacy of consciousness. As I quote one well-known speaker and author, Bernardo Kastrup, he will say, we cannot define consciousness in terms of anything else, but we can define everything else in terms of consciousness. So matter is derivative from consciousness, not the other way around. And that's a similar case that Srila Siddha Maharaj made in his Subjective Evolution of Consciousness. So that I want to clarify that, because again, many times one says the word evolution or something, and there's like an immediate overreaction or reaction that concludes in a certain way, but that doesn't necessarily mean we are proposing certain things that are many times assumed to be as part of that. Now, in connection to your question on scriptural depictions of people living in previous ages that lasted for a certain amount of time, again, there are different stances. Of course, some of them will deny absolutely the possibility of biological evolution based on those texts. And of course, that conversation can be limited among the followers of that particular tradition, no? Because of course, if you go to someone who is not a Gaudiya Vaishnava, and it's just like, I don't know, a particular scientist, when they come with as much evidence as they have to prove the evolution of the human species, and you say, no, but in my book, it says that, and they may not take it too seriously, and I'm not saying that's wrong. It's just that at least in certain conversations, you cannot bring those cards, so to say, to play. There's place for that to do so in the context of a particular faith and tradition. But again, there are some members even of the tradition who will subscribe to other theories, some of them being that, for example, there has been humans, but there have been like cyclical periods of creation and extinction. So we could speak about evolution of human species, but before that, there was an extinction of a previous cycle of human species. And that's how you can speak about humans having existed millions of years ago, but eventually stopping existing, so to say, and then re-existing, and so on and so forth. And then you may have other practitioners who will read certain sections of the scriptures in terms of time, with another way of measuring time, basically, like and drawing from some other. And I try to address that a little bit in my book, in an attached article that I wrote that is not part of the book, but there is a link to it in the book. It's a long conversation we may not have full time to deal with here. Probably with Vraja Kishor, you can also have a detailed conversation about that. But yeah, the units of time are seen in a different way as how we may take them literally, basically. So instead of thinking in terms of millions of years, those millions of years actually mean thousands of years. There are some sections in some scriptures that tend to hint at that possibility, that actually what is being described as this amount actually refers to this amount. So those are some of the possibilities in how one could try to deal with that particular problem, which I would say that's one of the main ones from our tradition, no? The duration of the ages and the depiction of humans existing through the ages.
Wow, thank you. That's so interesting about the time, and so many other things that you mentioned does make sense. And yeah, I was thinking that, it's what I get from what you shared is that it's helpful when we are open, instead of being rigid about like our scriptures say this and this is the truth. Instead, we can be humble and be open to really learning and trying to understand, what it is, and also appreciate what science has to offer. Like you say, it can be somewhere in the section you're saying that it can be a complementary pathway.
Of course, I'm
yeah, I
not saying.
really like that. I said I
Yeah.
really like that because there are some things about science that, like, when you look into it, it gives us a sense of awe and wonder, like helping us connect even deeper with the
Yeah.
creation and creator behind the creation. So, yeah.
Scientific endeavor can be approached as a form of mystical contemplation, if you will, if you have the eyes to see that. And actually, I share that in the book. I think that's quoted by a Gaudiya Vaishnava author, scholar Jonathan Edelman, that he will say that if the material world is understood as God's Leela of creation, as we do, the Srishti Leela, so the divine sacred play of creation, and if contemporary science is the study of material nature, so if material nature is the God's Leela, contemporary science is the study of material nature, of God's Lila, then science itself could be seen as some form of Lila Smaranam. No? Smaranam not only means remembering something from the past, but contemplation. Contemplation of the Lila, which many times we just think, oh, Lila Smaranam means someone gave you Siddha Pranali and told you what's your Gopi name, and you think of your service in Golok Vrindavan, but that's a very particular way of thinking about that. But in a general way, Lila Smaranam means contemplation of the sacred play. And all this creation, all this cosmos, all this unfolding is Srishti Lila. So a proper, rigorous scientific pursuit and study, as you say, in awe and wonder, a genuine scientist will be filled with that, could be framed as a form of Lila Smarana, one of the main angas of bhakti. But going to your comment before, I will say that I think it's important. I'm not trying here to downplay the influence of our scriptures, and I know that for some people it may be confusing in the beginning, and we need to over absolutize everything. And sometimes there may be some relativity in certain sections of scripture. The Bhagavatam itself, which is our, if you will, most absolute scripture, the book itself said there are some sections who are not absolute, basically. There's relativity. There are substantial elements, and there are relative elements, and one needs to discern properly which is which. And sometimes there may be some situations, some statements that may not fully agree with statements from contemporary science, and that doesn't mean that then we have to surrender to contemporary science and discard scripture, but also it doesn't mean that we should absolutely overlook other disciplines because we just are strict followers of scripture, and we may be reading scripture in a very literalistic, superficial way, rather than understanding from which place it's saying whatever it's saying about nature or whatever. So I think there is a place for a multidisciplinary approach in which, you are studying a bhakti text, but there are insights coming from other, not only mystical traditions, but even other secular disciplines like history, psychology, science, and there's place to allow us to be nourished and informed by them in a way that is not destroying our faith in revelation, not canceling revelation itself, but bringing elements, especially especially I would say, if one is willing to interact with modernity and try to convey this ancient message to the modern world. You cannot just come with the book and hit people on the head with the book and dismiss altogether all other sources of knowledge. But again, all that has to be done in a tasteful, nuanced way, without compromising the essence of revelation, but without also discarding other forms of knowledge that may not be absolute, may not be mystical, but may be pointing to realities that need to be considered. And again, at the end of the day, of course, in one sense, I would say it's not that important that, did humans start to exist a few 100,000 years ago, or they existed for millions of years ago? For me, that's in one sense secondary. At the same time, whether you think in one way or another, as I try to make the case in my book, whether one subscribes to biological Darwinian evolution, natural selection, or some variety of that, or absolutely not, still there is place for us to speak about the evolution of matter. Still there is a place to see matter as evolving in the context of the evolution of divine love. So I try to make that key point hopefully as clear as possible. Even when we, for a moment, as I do in my book, go, let's explore this possibility of biological evolution as a possibility, as an exploration. But even whether you agree or not with this, still this point remains, in my opinion, I will say, again, non-negotiable. Consciousness is the primary force, primary motor behind evolution, and there is an undeniable way we can talk about the evolution of matter in the context of the evolution of divine love.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes sense that matter would be facilitating the evolution of consciousness, like kind of both going together. which is
Mm.
beautiful, really. And like, as you're speaking, it seems like, yeah, obvious, like almost like that. That seems quite.
Sorry. No, for us in our tradition, matter in personified form is Maya Shakti, and Maya Shakti is a servant of the divine. So from our perspective, it's not very difficult to make that point. Okay, matter is serving the unfolding of love and of God, because matter personified is a Vaishnavi, as our tradition will say, of the highest order, which means material energy in its personified form is serving the unfolding of love in God's heart. So naturally, matter will unfold and grow and evolve to accommodate the growth and unfolding of love's own loving heart. So it's simple in one sense, but again, unless and until we put it in these ways, maybe still may not make sense to some, but if we don't get to explain it in certain ways, it may not become evident sometimes. So I mean, it was not evident for me for a long time. I mean, I'm not saying that this was with me from day one. So these are things that sometimes can come as part of the evolution and the unfolding of one's own journey. Gradually we start to become aware of, again, by things that are being said in scripture by our acharyas, nourished and complemented by some other insight from other disciplines, and okay, that was always there. I was only missing. So now I'm coming and becoming aware of this ever evolving, ever unfolding reality. Yeah.
And one other thing that came to mind also is Srila Sridhar Maharaj's statement that the environment is friendly. So that seems to be another aspect. It's friendly. The environment matter supports our evolution in divine love.
Yeah, yeah. Supportive. That's a nice word. Environment is supportive of what needs to take place in the context of the evolution of divine love. So yeah, as a Vaishnavi of the highest order, matter is evolving in a very, capable way to accommodate whatever needs to hold space for whatever needs to evolve and grow into in its next iteration or version or chapter. So again, that's the capacity of a great lover. Vaishnavi, matter is a great lover, a great servant of love. So those great lovers have that great capacity to grow and expand and unfold and accommodate what's required to, again, serve the necessity, tend to the necessities of love. So that's basically what matter is doing. As unusual as that may sound to some, but the only thing that matter is doing is to tend to the necessities of love, being the greatest Vaishnavi that she is. So we are invited to join the celebration, so to say, of service.
We welcome Vraja Kishor, Vic DiCara, to today's discussion on the possibility of biological evolution, and is biological evolution mentioned in the sacred texts? Vraja Kishor is a musician, an author, an astrologer, and not only a student and lover of the Srimad Bhagavatam and sacred texts, but he's also a translator and is in process of translating the Srimad Bhagavatam into a very accessible version. So no doubt that his perspectives will add richness to this conversation today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation and the introduction.
Well, thanks for living such a rich life and for all the offerings that you make to the community. So we'll kick us off with just a question, and then we'll see where it goes from there. So one consideration in this section of evolution and divine love is that deep evolution, or in this case, like the soul's journey toward never-ending love, and biological evolution are possibly very intertwined. So that they just are describing perhaps different layers of the same unfolding, where consciousness doesn't originate in matter, but its expression becomes more articulated and the moreness of love can occur through the evolutionary complexity. So I'm wondering how this underlying perspective, how it corresponds to your perception and understanding that you've gained through your studies of evolution and the journey of the soul in the sacred texts.
Yeah, I think this talk, this brings up the actual fundamental difference between Vedantic science, sorry about that, between Vedantic science and, I don't know how to silence that, so that may happen a few times. This brings up the actual difference between Vedantic sciences and most of the modern sciences. The actual difference isn't really, what order the planets are in or who evolved from what, when. The actual difference really boils down to one side thinks that consciousness is produced from matter, and the other side thinks that consciousness is the producer of matter. Fortunately for people like us, it's not difficult to choose a side. Because, for anybody that I don't know, sometimes I'm extremely condescending and I don't like it, but I can't help it. For anybody that thinks really systematically, you can discount the idea that consciousness comes from matter, because just in the definition of reality itself, reality is something that you can experience. Reality is something that's real. What's real is something you can touch, something you can feel. If it's not real, it means you couldn't feel it, you couldn't see it, you couldn't touch it. So consciousness is the predicate for being able to touch, see, or feel anything. So it's just a simple, logical necessity that consciousness is the foundation or the predicate or the substrate of reality, not the other way around. It's not a byproduct of reality. So if you come now closer to the idea of what's driving evolution, what's driving change in the physical system, it has to go all the way back to that root, in my opinion, because there's a reason for matter being produced in the first place. And what is the reason? According to Vedanta, is the beautiful reason. It's really that consciousness is the seer. So what's the meaning to being a seer unless you can see something? You're not a seer unless you see something. So in Brahman itself, there's these two sides to it. There's a side which is seeing and a side which is seen. And these things, the seer is what we call prakriti, and the seer, and the seen is what we call prakriti, and the seer is what we call purusha. So whether prakriti is material or spiritual, it doesn't make a difference. It behaves in the same way. It responds to the purusha, and it takes shapes and things that the purusha wants to see. So that's what's really driving the existence of matter in the first place, and also the various shapes that it takes. So I think that's pretty similar to the idea that it's the desire. Love is basically a favorable desire, the enactment of a favorable desire, anukulyena krishnana shilana. So it's really the fact that consciousness has desire, kamosmi, or all those kind of statements from the Shrutis, like sa kamyata bahusyam prajayata. Those Upanishadic statements say that because there's kama inherent in Brahman, that's why things have unfolded. That's why things have manifested. So kama is also the basis for prema. Kama is also the basis, like the desire is the motivator of emotion, which is the motivator of expression. So I think we're on the same page with the idea that it's love that's actually driving systems to change. One other way to look at it also is just that systems don't change. Systems tend to reach equilibrium if they're not affected by something else. They reach an entropy or equilibrium or something. It's only when outside forces interact with a system that it sets the system more in motion. So if you just have prakriti by itself, according to Sankhya, what happens to prakriti is she just equalizes. She just equalizes and becomes neutralized, which is like a system completely at rest. And it's only when the outside force, which is described as Purusha's glance, like the attention of the Purusha wanting to see, which like catalyzes the prakriti. The system has to have some energy applied to it in order for it to get going in motion. And once it gets going in motion, it can start to do its own cause and effect. That's basically my sense of a reply.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, in this chapter, it's said over and over again that love is the driving force of all things, and that we can actually even equate the word consciousness with love. So that's and one thing I was wondering also, if you could help me understand that in what I understand about evolution, it's like when one thing evolves into something else, that prior form no longer exists.
No, well, I wanted to discuss this a little bit. I was hoping this would come up. One of the reasons I think these conversations get messy quick is because people aren't really talking about the same thing. They'll use the word evolution, but they don't understand it in the same way, the two people talking about it. So I'd like to maybe clarify what I think I'm talking about when I talk about evolution.
Yes, great.
So just the word, basically, evolution is very important to understand. It's a Latin-based word, and it's from ex volere, which means, so volere means to roll, like revolution, when something revolves. So volere means it's rolling, and then ex means something's coming out, popping out. So the concept of evolution is that something is spinning and something's popping out from it. So that's like the very, very literal concept of the meaning. So what the spinning means is like a wheel rolling forward on a path, or just the spinning of the wheel of time, spinning of the earth, the movement of the heavens. In other words, the spinning part is time moving forward. And then the X part is, what's the product? What happens as time moves forward? So evolution, and of course that's a Latin word, it's the English language. If you want to relate it with Sanskrit, there's many, many, many words that express the same thing. But even like a word like vibhav or visarga can mean the same thing as that, but especially there's a word parinama. I think I pronounced it wrong, maybe it's parinama. It's some slight mistake I may have made. But it's, again, pari is even the spinning thing. So it's like identical concept being expressed there in parinama. So that concept of like, as time moves forward, new things pop out, nobody in their right mind can deny it. A seed, if you take care of a seed, then it becomes a sprout. That's evolution. If you take care of a child, they become an adult. That's evolution. If we just let this conversation go on and on and on, it'll go someplace. That's also evolution. So now then there's many, many different, that's like the generic idea of what evolution is. Now somebody particular may have a very specific idea about how it applies. Like typically the people like me that dabble in science and don't really know it that well, we think of Darwin. Darwin's evolution, I don't really know exactly what his idea is. So I don't really want to talk exactly about Darwin's idea of evolution. Of course I know a little bit about it, but he has some specific idea of evolution. Somebody else has some other specific idea, and then they modify everybody modifies it as they go along. But the basic concept of evolution, of just things changing as a result of what they were before, mutating over time, that's just the way that reality works. We can see it we can see it every day. Now, in somebody's theory of evolution, maybe it's necessary that the prior thing has to disappear. There might be somebody out there that develops a theory of evolution where the seed has to disappear in order to become a sprout. The child has to disappear in order to become an adult. But it's not a parinamavad. It's not like a Vedic evolutionary thing. So for example, like prakriti, hopefully we could talk about this too, but the whole Sankhya concept is so evolutionary. But so prakriti has to evolve to become mahat, to become buddhi, to become manas, to become all this 5 things that we see, touch, feel, all that stuff evolves from prakriti. But none of the prior things cease to exist. They still exist. Or like, in a sense, I'm a product or an evolution from my parents. But they didn't die. They didn't die by creating me. Sometimes it happens, unfortunately, but it's not necessary. So it's not actually necessary, and that's one of the, kind of, I would say, maybe amateur arguments against Darwinian theory is like, if it's true that survival of the fit, because he did his survival of the fittest was one of his catchphrases. If it's true that if you have to be fit to survive this condition and that's why the life evolved that way, then all the other guys should have died. Yeah, he is a little bit susceptible to that, it seems like. So therefore you would just see one life form, one like superhero life form existing, the best, most fittest dude in the world, and everybody else has died out because they failed to pass that test. And that's not the world that we see. So his specific version of evolution might be wrong, but it doesn't mean that the concept itself is not shastric.
Yeah, and actually, I had that question just my own self. As I was contemplating this talk today, I was thinking of how, just like as you said, within our own lifespan, our body is evolving from a child to an adult, and that baby body doesn't exist any longer. But when we hear about evolution of how one element comes from another element that comes from another element, then those do remain. So like I was just trying to figure out how is one actually evolution, or they're just different ways of looking at it?
This is
Or
really interesting also because this is related with the actual Parinamavada, which is so Parinamavada. Now I might be getting somebody who really knows this stuff also might catch a mistake. Did I make I apologize if I make a mistake, but as best as I can remember, Parinamavad and Satkaryavad go together. So Satkaryavad means the tendency of the cause to remain in the effect.
yes.
So, and actually in Yoga Sutra, this is a brilliant exposition that Patanjali gives. He gives this exposition about what time is, because in samadhi you become independent of time, and you perceive all things in one moment. And he actually explains logically how it's possible by basically setting up a Satkaryavad and saying that the present is the only reality. The past exists because of its effect in the present, and the future exists because its seed is in the present. So actually, there is no past and future. It's just the present changing, evolving. The present is evolving, and that's, we call it past and future. He calls it a manifestive or a generative state. If it's the one that you're looking back at some version of what produced the reality, then it's the past. It's called generative state. And if you're looking forward at what this reality is going to be producing next, then it's a manifestive state. So that's just amazing. And it also shows you that really, my child body does still exist, but it's just like I had brown eyes, I had brown hair, I had the same kind of big nose and all, same eyelashes. Because the child body produced the adult body, it doesn't just disappear and produce something unrelated to it. The past produces things which are related to it, caused by it in the present. That's Satkaryavad. So even from that perspective, the prior entity in the evolutionary chain doesn't just go extinct. It doesn't just disappear. It's just that it's like which parts of it are fully manifest versus which parts of it are not fully manifest change.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, Vedic philosophy is just so incredibly good.
Yeah, that was really helpful. It's not like you evolve into like an elephant body, but
Yeah.
your baby body simply unfolds into a moreness, really.
Mhm.
You were going to say something, Sweta?
Yeah, I mean, slightly different from what we've been discussing so far, I think. I was thinking, I mean, you mentioned the state of samadhi. This is something that's available only to humans, I'm assuming. Like, what I'm trying to say is that even if consciousness is not emerging from matter, the shape of the matter does have an influence on how the consciousness is evolving. So, like, in the human body, human body uh, enables us to like evolve our consciousness in a way that is not available in other forms of life, right? So I was thinking, if soul by nature is Satchidananda, like full of knowledge, why is it that like a particular, like, form, like a human form is necessary to gain awareness and gain knowledge? One of the things I was thinking is that knowledge probably is present. It's our inquiry, like when we question, that becomes revealed. So yeah, I mean, I wonder, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, I do. I think what you said, actually, you know the answer. By what you said, you answered it correctly. Like with the thing about you said about the questioning. So the question, what you said about the questioning process and how that is the knowledge is really like the right steps to figure out how the sages, the rishis thought of this. To explain it as best as I can, it's a misconception that's because the soul has such an ananda, it's a misconception to say that it's full of bliss, knowledge, and eternality. It means that it's such an ananda. It means that it is eternal, it is blissful, and it is knowing, right? So it means that it can be blissful, it can hold knowledge, it can hold joy, it can hold reality, it can hold existence. It's not that it's full of joy. Even that question is even bigger than the knowledge part. If I'm full of joy, then what am I doing messing around with all this sadness? Where's it coming from? And how is this sadness so big that it covers up this inherent spiritual bliss? You come to the same problem that Advaitavadis, Mayavadis have, that it's actually impossible to cover something perfect. They think that Brahman is affected by something else against its will. So similarly, if you would say that you have all this knowledge and bliss in your soul originally, but it's just like covered right now, well, what is it that's covering it? And how is it so superior to the soul that it's able to cover it? So really, the soul, like when we say the soul, we talk about us. We're not talking about other souls that are not in these problematic situations. And we're not talking about souls that are nitya parishats, or the souls that are naturally in their proper position. We're talking about the people that are bahirmukh. So that's us. That's the ones whose orientation is inherently not within and not towards Paramatma. So we never really activated. We have yet to activate ourself even, because we haven't even looked inward towards what the root of it is. We haven't even looked inwards. So we have all this. We do have all the Satchit Ananda, like software in the soul, but it hasn't been turned on. It hasn't been run, and instead, because it's been replaced instead by a different outlook, which is the like external outlook. I want to look away from Atma. So I want to see prakriti as something that's outside of me, rather than prakriti as something that's within the consciousness itself. And in that way, maybe I don't even know why we're like this. And I think the explanation, there is no explanation for it. They just say that people just, in order for there to be consciousness, it has to see things. And for it to see, you have to have all different angles of vision. And some people are bahirmukh, they look away. I can't explain it. But we will activate. You have to receive bhakti to activate the ananda, or you have to receive vidya to activate the chit, the knowledge potency. the soul has the potency to have knowledge, and you'll see it no matter what the life form is. I like to look at all these small creatures, again, like even the bacteria are, I mean, that's hard, you need a microscope, but if you look at like ants, birds, butterflies, the way they behave, it's so you feel like a camaraderie with them. Their behavior is just the same as ours. All their motivations, all their actions, they're just like a non-complicated versions of humans. They're just seeking their happiness, but they're doing it pretty automatically, but still, it's so relatable. So all the life forms are looking like plants. That's the amazing thing about plants, how they grow towards the sun. How do they do that? They have a sense of where the sun is, and they move their bodies to go more into the sunlight. They're searching for their chit. They're searching for chit. Where is the Ananda? Where is the light? And why? Because they want to be healthy and happy, because they want their Ananda to maintain the Sat, to maintain their existence. So we're all the same behavior, same psychology. It's just the further you go down the evolutionary chain, from the simple creatures to the more complex ones, the more sophisticated and elaborate it gets. And like you said also, then there's this huge gateway between non-human animals and human animals. And that gateway really is language. Verbal, fully grammatically developed language is really the key, because then you access the Veda with the language, and you can deal with concepts. And then they also say that post-human, there's a stage also past human evolution, which is the 10th stage, which was the actual biological, let's say, I don't even know if that's the right word, but like physical forms for the gods. But they say that even the gods, they of course also have linguistic, better than us, but their conditions are not really favorable, like our conditions are. So they say the gods that are interested in spiritual development are trying to become humans. And here we are just, being sad or committing suicide or just wasting life.
That's really interesting, because you're saying that's a post-human stage, but then they want to become humans, like
Yeah.
step back.
Only some of them. It depends on what the motive is. So as even in Yoga Sutra also, Patanjali talks about this, that if your motive is for moksha, then the human form is ideal. But if your motive is for bhukti, then it's not the most ideal form. The devas forms are much better. So bhukti means enjoyment. I'm not sure who our audience is, so I don't know how much.
I'm glad you clarified, because when you said bhakti first, it sounded like bhakti, and I was confused a bit.
Bhakti, bhoga. Bhakti is for enjoying bhoga.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so one thing that came to my mind is, in the human form, we have the self-awareness and all of that. And you were saying how once the activation starts, then the knowledge becomes manifest. So I was thinking, from the human form, then if someone were to go to the animal form after this activation, like I remembered the story of Bharat Maharaj, where he becomes a deer, right? Like in his next life, and he has like that awareness still. So yeah, I mean, it's not so much the body, then maybe you stop questioning there in the animal form or something. Like, yeah, I mean, all these things, I feel like we're just left with so many questions and never really know for exactly what is going on.
Padmanabha is an interesting case. That story is, I think, the best in the whole fifth canto. That's the tale of Bharata, and just where that goes and how he winds up teaching that pompous king at the end. It's such an incredibly good story. That's my favorite part of the fifth canto. But yeah, the part where he becomes a deer is also so poignant, also so misunderstood by the English readers and the readers in the English community. So all the points towards compassion and everything, the way that people rally against compassion and use him as an example, as if his becoming a deer was like the most embarrassing thing in the world for him.
Yeah.
It's actually like an amazing thing that happened with him. But yeah, it's biologically speaking or scientifically speaking, how is it possible that he's a deer but has a mind with the complexity of a human?
Mm-hmm.
The only way that I would seek an answer to that is Matak Smritir Jnanamopohanam Cha Hriti Sanivishta. He's with everybody. Super soul Parmama. The knowledge actually isn't coming from the brain so much. Brain just processes data. It's just like my mother. Unfortunately, my mother has some form of disease in the brain where she's not really able to process the information to make new memories. But her old memories are fine. So that's what the brain does, really. It just processes the data that it receives from the senses, and it changes it into these more concise symbols that the mind can understand. But it's actually the mind, which is not a physical thing, that reacts to what the brain is telling it and showing it. And the way that the mind is reacting with the Purusha is via the Paramatma. So Krishna is like this gatekeeper between the Prakriti and the Purusha. And he says that therefore, because I'm this gate, the only way that you can know anything from the brain is through me. The only way that you could forget anything or not know something from the brain is also through me. So I think when you have these rare cases of people who are very specifically targeted by Krishna, like Bharata, then Paramatma will perform special things for them. They'll do things that aren't really physically normal. So you could get human intelligence in a deer's body if Paramatma intervenes with that. That's how I made sense of that. Actually, I never even thought it was weird until you mentioned it, because I'm so used to like the fables and the stories, Hitopadesh and all those, or regular children's stories from Japan or America stuff. I didn't even think twice about that.
Yeah, I mean, it just occurred to me as we were discussing, and it seems like the human form. I mean, it is mentioned in our scriptures too, like, that human form is like so essential and, the ultimate form that we can have here on this earth. So yeah, I mean, one other thing I was thinking is like, how this nature of questioning, like, who am I? Isn't that present in God also? Like, it's said that God himself doesn't know the full extent of his like beauty and like, existence, even I think as in like what he is all about completely. So he's also kind of like questioning and evolving.
See where our conversation has evolved. It's gone on a new branch. But with this is the difference between karma and lila. This is the basic difference between karma and lila. Both of them are actions or kriya. But what's the difference between a karma and a lila is it's the difference basically between a grown-up and a child. In Japan, there's a wonderful word, asobi, which basically means lila. And the way that you write it with Chinese letters is you do the picture for like a way of something happening, and then you do a picture for a child. So asobi really means the way a child acts. Play or lila really means the way a child acts. Why does a child act that way? Because a child doesn't have responsibilities. Right? So they don't have responsibilities, they don't have things they have to do, so then they just play. But adults, we have responsibilities, things we have to do, so we work. So basically, when there's a vidya, we're like struggling all the time to survive, even literally. We're struggling for food, we're struggling for warmth, we're struggling for happiness all the time. So all of our actions are characterized as karma, because they're things that we have to do. Even the questioning, even the search for knowledge is a karma. I mean, strictly speaking, it's a category of karma, which is called jnana. But so the question of who am I and stuff, the way that we ask it is not the same as the way that Bhagavan explores it. You see, because the way that a child acts, or the way that you or I will act, sometimes they say a drunk person is a good example. They don't really have a reason for doing something. They just like laugh or say something weird because they're drunk, and they just feel like doing it. So children also act like that, or when you feel very happy, you might just do something just because. So there's another kind of action which isn't motivated by need, it's motivated by surplus. And that type of action is called lila. And that includes also the Gyanendriya action, like the action for acquiring knowledge and information, which Bhagavan also has. But it's not like, I need to find out who I am. I want to know who I am. Who am I? It's not that existential search. It's more like the exploration of the amazingness of who and what I am. Is it okay that we strayed so far from the topic of evolution? I think it's great. Yeah.
Absolutely. Everything belongs.
Okay.
Yeah, and kind of tying it in with evolution, evolution seems in a lot of people's minds to be something that is kind of mechanistic. And looking at it from the angle of Leela, which is very spontaneous and, without, as you were saying, without cause, then that would really give a different perspective on evolution. As God is evolving, love is evolving, matter is evolving, the soul is evolving. So it's taking Leela into account really puts a different spin on evolution.
Yeah. It has been said that the material manifestation is also a Leela. It's difficult to comprehend that as well. I'm not confident that I understand that either, but I have heard it. But I think I maybe understand it, but not really well enough to explain it to anybody. But one thing I would want to say is about mechanistics. So there are many, many mechanistic things happening in reality. It doesn't mean that there's not a Purusha, that there's not a conscious being. Like right now, we're doing this conversation with all these mechanisms between us. And there's just these simple processes going on of causes and effect, from the video camera doing whatever it does, transmitting, changing it into this and that, sending it to the microphone, doing that, all these, God knows what's going on the phone lines, sending information back and forth. It's just purely mechanistic. However, there are conscious beings driving the mechanisms. Like in my car, I don't have a car. One of the reasons why I was talked into moving to Japan is because you wouldn't need a car. Because I hate driving. Anyway, let's say I had a car. So my car is a mechanism, it's a machine. But it doesn't mean that there's not a person driving it. There can be a person driving it. So similarly, sometimes when I was young and I was first exploring Vaishnava philosophy, Vedic philosophy, my dad was a real serious debate opponent, because that man is very, very difficult to debate. So he really put me through a lot of stress, working out my wrong ideas in a good way. So I remember one of the ways that I stumbled early on in trying to be like a devotee of Vedic thinking and Vedic thought is just to be too black and white and just be too much like, no, there's a Purusha, there's consciousness is the real cause of everything. So there's no mechanisms. Whereas you could just like I proved, by a seed evolving into a plant, that there is such a thing as evolution, you can prove that there's mechanisms too. Mm-hmm. There's mechanisms. A rocket ship puts thrust in one direction and it moves the other direction. It's mechanistic. So the world is mechanistic. That's fine, really. But where we differ, we being like the Vedantic theists, how we differ from most of the modern scientists is they think that it's just the mechanisms. And that the consciousness is like a side effect of these mechanisms, or like the grand the grand, strange, odd achievement of all these mechanisms, whereas we think people make machines and people use machines. Our philosophy is way more rational.
Mm-hmm. It's what we experience on a daily basis.
Right.
Yeah, behind everything there is a person. There is consciousness, there is the driving force of love. And yeah, I totally see your point. Things are mechanistic, and behind everything there is that person. And it's interesting, going back to Darwin, Swami brings up in this section that he's actually has been like very misunderstood, where a lot of his impetus was because of the awe and the wonder that he saw in nature, and like God's presence there. He himself was shocked that somehow he presented like in a way an atheistic or a godless kind of mechanism, a mechanism without personhood, without purpose, without expression, without. So it's interesting because he himself was surprised by how he was received, and it seems like the sign of our times to do away with the persons, with personal.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I wondered, like, at what point this division started, like it seemed like the previous scientists actually were God conscious, and science wasn't necessarily like something that was that's separate from, discovery of who we are and who God is and all of that. But now it's clearly like opposites. I remember a time in my life, I also believed that if somebody is a scientist or even a doctor, that means they don't believe in God. Only later I found out, no, the older scientists like Einstein, Newton, and people like that, they did believe in God. Yeah, I wonder,
I think
when
also
this division started.
it's not just like that. I mean, most of the scientists themselves are profoundly spiritual to this day.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the one thing that people, I can agree with them 100%. One thing that scientific people just don't like is the way that religious structures control the way your intellect is allowed to function. And science can't permit that. You can't permit that. You can't think clearly if somebody is telling you you're not allowed to think this or that.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're not allowed to check this or that, or see if this or that is true. So people conflate, I think that's the right word, conflate religion and God, and conflate religion and spirituality often. And science is fairly uniformly opposed to Western religion and Catholic-based religion and Christian-based religion because of the church's desire to govern the way they're thinking. But even Carl Sagan is one of my favorites. Carl Sagan is a very recent guy from the 70s. He did that very famous TV show on PBS in America called Cosmos. It was the greatest thing. When I was a kid, I was like 7 years old, I was watching this show. It was like watching the Vedas on TV. It was so interesting. It was so, and that man is very spiritual. Well, what was I going to say about him? Oh, even I remember there was like episode 5 or whatever. I still have the DVD set somewhere. Episode 5, he talks about Hinduism. Episode something, he talks about Hinduism, and he's giving it such a glowing review. He's like really praising it. He said nobody else thinks on these huge time scales. Nobody else has these concepts that are so similar to ours about how the universe originated and how life arose. This is an amazing, culture and religious background. So it's not even that scientists, the one thing that they have going very good for them is that they're very objective. They're not very emotional in their thinking. So even if they reject like Christianity and Christian God, it doesn't mean that they're opposed to religion or spirituality or anything. They just rejected something that they found was bad, most of them. So actually, my experience of people that are intelligent in any way whether it be science intelligence or creative intelligence or theistic intelligence, they're all in awe. That's what drives us to want to know. That's what drives us to want to know more about something. Like Patanjali said, if you don't have an interest in something, that's why you don't know it. He says the mind knows everything, but the question of why does it not know something then is because he says actually he knows it, but he's not interested in it. He says you're only aware of the things you're interested in. So similarly, the people that have a lot of knowledge are the people that have a lot of interest. Then they have a lot of love, and that's the same thing. Love is interest. So I'm sure it's because people love nature that they studied nature. So yeah, even to this day, actually, scientists are much more theistic. I think one of the problems that spiritualists have is egoism. We have this fantastic self-righteousness, and that we're better categorically better than these other people. It's very difficult to get rid of that. So we tend to think these other people, they can't be the same as us because they don't chant such and such a mantra, or they don't dress this way or whatever. But actually there's people out there that are more devoted to God than we are, and have nothing to do with any religion or spiritual book.
Yeah,
I think.
totally agree.
Yeah.
That especially in, institutionalized religion, how we we just get stuck there and forget, and we hang up the mystery. The mystery is no longer sought after. It's no longer driving us. The awe and like you said, the awe and the wonder, and that's the basis of real surrender. So even a scientist who is dedicates his whole life out of the awe and wonder of things, it's a surrendering to the process of understanding, of knowledge, and to put ourselves above because we have some kind of structure that we can lean upon and we can feel secure about, that keeps things in its place, that we can use to control and feel safe. That it's funny because people will think that that's what science does. Science just wants to figure things out so they can control it, but it's so much more than that. And it seems like the purpose of science, the purpose of religion, has kind of swapped places in a way, where the people who search for the mystery and who are willing to change their minds and change their angles of visions and revamp how they see things, how they see the world. I mean, they're willing to throw out theories that have been standing for so long just for the sake of coming closer to a truth. But a lot of times people who are consider themselves religious, they'll hang on to something, and even if evidence, even if they experience something that gives them, provides evidence in the opposite direction, no, we can't change. It's like this, and it's been like this, and it's been like this because that person thought it, and we're just not willing to evolve, basically.
I agree.
But Padmanabha Maharaj says in this section that religion and spirituality is like a state of consciousness, like it's something that we evolve into, so so I'm thinking that, many of us, or some of us, grow up in a religious family, so religion is something that's given to us right from birth, and we don't really even understand why it is there, why we should practice or follow it and all of that. So in one sense, we receive something that we are not ready for. Sometimes, not all the time. And in case of scientists, maybe they receive that, they evolve into that state of consciousness and not necessarily name it religion or spirituality, but in their actions, practice, they follow it and live that life.
I agree. I agree. You guys say everything very well. I have nothing to add.
I kind of want to take this in a slightly different direction. Where do you think that there can be such a thing as devolution of kind of going backwards even, and okay, I was also going to touch on like relationality. Do you think that evolution is something that can be done, or that can occur in a vacuum kind of, or is everything relational as and necessary for evolution?
All right, let me respond to devolution. So what would you mean by that? Like, what would be an example of it?
Humanity becoming less and less compassionate on a large scale.
Yeah, obviously that's happening. That can happen, and you can have fluctuations up and down. I think that there's an unfold. This is one of the things that Carl Sagan really liked about Vedic philosophy was, at the time in science, in empiric science, they were very enamored of the idea of the universe potentially being something that expands and then contracts. It's still one of the theories. And then he was talking about Vishnu's breathing with the bubbles and how they come out and then go back in. So there is a sense of sarga and visarga as like being, sarga is like the initial manifestation of the ingredients in creation. Like if you gave a child a box of Legos, that's like a sarga. And then visarga is how the child plays with the Legos, what they put together. So then there's this visarga is like the evolution and how things go from the building blocks to the specific shapes. Then you have nirodha, which happens at the other end of the timeline. Then, of course, Bhagavatam explains that there's, I think, 4 different kinds of nirodhas. Some of the timelines are very short. Not all the timelines are universal. So there's a evolution and a de-evolution for one person's body. It decays as well. I'm starting to get close to that age where it's starting to like decay. I think my parents are in that age where they're dealing with that. And then that decay leads to the destruction. So if you look also at how yogis do this thing where they speed up the process that usually takes billions and billions of years. They speed it up into a moment and then they get it all done. So what they do is they actually devolve. They devolve everything down the whole same line of Sankhya. So they'll take all of their, let's say, air, and they'll put it all into one element. And they'll take all their moisture and put it into one conglomerated element of water. And then they'll push those back into the tamaguna. It's kind of like the yoga where you relax, they'll relax that back.
Yoga nidra.
Yeah. Or it's yin, since 1993, they call it yin yoga, which is, I think, my favorite. You're just like relaxing into the gravity instead of pushing. So anyway, it's like that. The yogis relax their constitution, and what winds up happening is a devolution. All the elements which evolved go in the reverse order back, and they wind up back into this equalized state. So, and then I think that happens on a very slow time scale for the entire universe as well. So what we're probably looking at with our science is probably mostly the evolutionary state, because we're in the first half of Brahma's life. I'm thinking as I'm speaking. So sometimes, so this is one of the cases where I'm thinking as I'm speaking. So maybe this is not correct. I could cross-analyze this myself. Right now, my brain is cross-analyzing myself.
As you're speaking.
Yeah, as I'm speaking. So it's a little difficult to get to the next sentence. But I think on the big gigantic time scale, you do get devolution. I'm not sure why science seems to only be interested in evolution. Maybe it's the main thing that they notice, or maybe it's because they're trying to ask the question of how did we get here? I don't know, but definitely devolution has to happen alongside with evolution. Otherwise, you run out of space, you run out of materials. You have to have destruction alongside creation, I think. That also, I think, if you want to touch on Sankhya and that whole thing of how the yogi is devolving it, looking at it looking at it from the regular angle, it would also be interesting to evolution, if you wanted to do that. Is that something you want to discuss?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, people should be familiar with what Sankhya is and how important it is. It's classically a typical answer of what Sankhya is one of the 6 darshans. Which means it's one of the 6 ways that Indian classical thought works. It's one of the 6 schools of Indian classical thought. But really, it's more than that, because it's one of the schools of thought that's used by every other one. You know,
Do they admit that?
Yeah, they're fine with that. In fact, if you read Bhagavatam, it's called Sankhya. And Kapila is teaching Devahuti Sankhya.
Mm-hmm.
They're not trying to hide it. They're happy with it. This is another beautiful thing about India is they're not very competitive. The schools aren't competitive. When they get really close, like the different kinds of Vaishnav, not Parivars, but like Madhvacharya and Ramanujacharya, they make it a little bit contentious. Yeah. But that's because they're getting so hair splitting about some certain particular detail. But when it's just in the general things, they're just very accepting and integrate each other. So the interesting thing about Sankhya is that it's basically empirical science, and it's the original form of empirical science. It's sistered with Vaisheshika, where Vaisheshika is more like the science of figuring out what's in the world. Like now we would say there's hydrogen, helium, blah, 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 blah. So Vaisheshika is the one that says like, okay, there's things called molecules, there's things called atoms, and there's these kinds of atoms and these kinds of molecules. That all started with Vaisheshika, which is the 3rd school. The 4th school, Sankhya, is how this stuff evolves. That's what the whole school is about. How this stuff evolves into what we get and what we deal with now, and how you can work with it. How you can work with it to see the difference with. I mean, the way yoga uses Sankhya is how can we work with this information to liberate the Purusha from prakriti. But Sankhya itself, the whole school itself is about evolution. So it's all about how prakriti is originally just equalized, and then it has some instant impetus to it, and then that causes the 3 modes to activate. Then the modes interact, the sattva interacts with this thing and catalyzes it, evolves into that mahat, and then this mahat tattva interacts with this other mode, and then that combination, that little chemical reaction, chemical reaction causes this manas to become a reality, and then that interacts with another mode, and that combination of interaction causes a new evolution to happen. I think you get tanmatras, then you get it gradually gets more and more and more concrete, gets more and more closer to the world that we have today. The whole thing is just literally an evolutionary theory. So for Vedantists or Vaishnavas to argue if evolution is Vedic, kind of reveals the fact that we didn't study Sankhya, or that we don't know what Sankhya is. And it's not some other discipline, it's in the Bhagavatam. And it's not just in the Bhagavatam like in passing, it's like repeatedly in the early cantos. I'm pretty sure it comes up in Canto 2, and I know it's like all over Canto 3. It's like the entire Canto 3. You get Maitreya explaining it to Vidura, and then you get Kapila just elaborating on it beautifully to his mother. So it's such an important part of everybody's philosophy, and it's literally evolution. Then you can split it also into inorganic and organic evolution. And also the way Maitreya presents it is that time is itself evolution. And you can't even get you can't even get cause and effect without evolution. The cause evolves into the effect. So time itself is the agent of evolution. That's why it's called evolution. That's what we're talking about, that wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And so he says it goes through these 7 stages of this inorganic evolution, which is the stuff that I was talking about before. There's no organic life. And this also is so similar to a modern perspective on the universal evolution, is that most of the time there's no life. Guess what? That's the same thing that Kapila has said in the Bhagavatam. Most of the time it's empty, and it's just this empty of consciousness. The consciousness is sleeping. It's just the dreaming of the consciousness and its sleeping state is pushing this evolution slowly forward. Very slowly forward, and it's gradually becoming ready to wake up these sleeping consciousnesses and host them. So yeah, you get this huge span of time where there's just nothing going on. And then there's one really interesting section somewhere in there in the 2nd or 3rd canto where they say that there is a problem. There was a problem in evolution after all of the, like, atoms, the Vedic versions of atoms. After all of the atoms had been formed, they refused to combine with each other. This is like relational too. It's the relationship of things which, I mean, that's what consciousness craves. The consciousness craves, the seer and the seen crave each other because that's their meaning is meaningless. Their existence is meaningless without each other. So it's the relationship between seer and seen, which is very dynamic, which is what's pulling all these things. So when there was no consciousness awake, the atoms didn't want to further their evolution. The prakriti energy didn't want to further its evolution. And the actual Paramatma had to infuse it again. It had to give it more of another conscious boost. Like I said, I wanted to prepare more for our talk, to remember the exact details, maybe give you exact references and stuff, but I didn't have the time, unfortunately. But that's what you could do with reading Bhagavatam, is you could discover all this stuff. You do have to kind of read it deeply, because if you just read a translation, then you're just at the mercy of what the translator understood. And then after that, it's like it finally develops into something that could host Brahma. And then Brahma takes birth. And then organic evolution begins from there under his direction. And then he designs all the life forms first, but then so this is also something which could be complicated, because in some places in the Bhagavatam it seems like things like gods come first before you get things like birds. But actually the way that it's described in this one section is, I have the section on my screen somewhere, 1 second. I could at least tell you the chapter. It's in Canto 3, Chapter 10. So the way that it's described is he did all of the designs. So he mentally created all of these things, starting from the most sophisticated ones, and then reusing the components in simpler and simpler form. But the way that they actually manifest in the physical world was from the simplest thing first. And then also you get the gods at the beginning, at the end, and at the end of the evolution. The reason is because what the gods actually are. And this is also very interesting in seeing how gods are not incompatible with science. What the gods actually are is the natural laws. And they're
the personification of them.
The personification of them is like the superintendent of the law. You know, the one who's like making sure that the law is not violated, or keeps giving it vital energy to keep being along, keep functioning. But the actual, like, tangible, practical form of a god, like Agni, is fire, literally. The tangible form of Indra is just literally rain. So it's not something that's like empirically nonsense. And all the stories, like Indra's struggle with Vritrasura, that's all just very real stuff about evaporation and condensation and precipitation. Yes, it has this persona. It's not like a myth. I'm not saying it's a myth. I'm saying it's real. But the level that it's real to us as human beings, the way that we would see it as real with telescopes, microscopes, and eyeballs, would be, this is the sun evaporating the Agni, the heat dragon thing, is evaporating the water goddess, stealing her, putting her up in a prison in the sky until Indra comes along and liberates her from the sky so she falls back down to the earth. It's the rain cycle. So the gods develop prior to organic evolution. They develop at the end of inorganic evolution. I think it's the 6th stage of the 10 stages of evolution. But they don't really have like tangible personified forms at that stage. This is why Vak could speak to Brahma. Remember, Brahma heard tapa. Well, who's around to hear the word tapa from you? Maybe you could say it was spoken by Vishnu, but the fact that it was in a verbal form means Vak must exist. Vak is the goddess of speech, who would later become Brahma's wife. So, but her form at that time was not really developed. It was just the power of speech. So then Brahma designs these gods and goddesses forms that would be proper for hosting such an entity. And those are the last to evolve. I'm telling you, I really like this. I'm so glad we had this conversation because it's been a while since I've had my head immersed in the 3rd canto, the 2nd canto. This stuff is great. And then the way that it goes on from there into talking about the descendants, the children that Brahma has, how he has children, what they do. It's just structured in such an engaging way. Yeah, I'm really happy that I'm studying it.
So it seems like very scientifically, there's personhood behind everything, and there's consciousness behind everything.
Yeah.
And
But if you're a scientist and you don't care about it, then you don't have to see it. That's one of the beautiful things of Krishna. He says in Gita, I reserve the right to be a secret. I forget the exact Sanskrit he says, but I'm not disclosed to everybody. I reserve the right. And he says, look, if you don't want to know me, I'm not going to get in your face. What reason does Krishna have to push himself in our face? Are we that important? So if you just want to see all the mechanisms and everything, you can just see the mechanisms, and you could spend your whole life enjoying and being in awe of these incredible mechanisms and how they work. You don't have to be theistic. Krishna doesn't force theism on anybody. It's not like it's so obvious in the world that you have no choice to see it, because that would defeat the whole purpose in the first place, which comes down to love. Again, the whole purpose in the first place of existence is love, which is a volition.
Okay.
It's not a forced act. So yeah, it's perfectly viable to be an atheist and perfectly viable to be a scientist and make total sense out of the world without reference to God, at least in your mind. At least in the mind of the scientist, you could be perfect. I wouldn't be satisfied with it because I have a different, vidya in my head. I'm seeing different things than that other person is.
Yeah, Krishna gives the intelligence to prove that he doesn't exist. Yeah, wow.
What a sneaky guy.
Because
Wow.
he's not he's not envious. He knows who he is. He has a very good sense of self. He knows who he is. He knows he's everything, and he doesn't need need that. Like you
Yeah.
said, we're not so important, but in another sense we are. So he gives every opportunity continually.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think also Krishna is not me, thank God. So he doesn't have my defects. I tend to get very arrogant, but Krishna's not arrogant. It's like, I think it's more out of respect.
Yes.
It's out of his respect for everybody that he
Yeah.
doesn't force himself into us, and that,
And he thinks we're wonderful.
hmm.
That the soul is wonderful. So that necessitates a lot of respect. Did you have something, Swetadweep?
Not really. I just wanted to say that it's so amazing to hear the evolutionary process that's present in Srimad Bhagavatam through the Sankhya philosophy. Like just when hearing you speak about it, I was thinking, wow, this is so interesting. I want to go back read it.
Yeah,
So yeah, thank you for that.
you're welcome. Thank you.
if you don't have anything more that you would like to explore, this might be a good place to pause and let our listeners digest some of the things that you've already shared.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds good. Appreciated the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for this.
Regardless of your stance on the possibility of biological evolution, take a moment to examine your current convictions on the subject. Have you truly allowed your beliefs to be challenged by evidence that may contradict them? Approach this inquiry with openness, reflecting on the value of broadening your perspective by engaging thoughtfully with differing paradigms. Were you aware of the above statements that suggest the possibility of biological evolution within Scripture? Rather than dismissing ideas that challenge your beliefs, take a moment to observe your reactions to this information. Stay open to change and refinement when necessary, and play out the implications of your conclusions accordingly.